yours. Yeah, I am.
Oh my God. Every time. What the hell?
You should probably re-roll some of
You're
this.
taking Tokyo. And you're taking
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Man.
Kill him.
I mean, you can have Tokyo.
Painful. You walk through the Game Developers Conference, and there's so many big things happening. You walk down the expo floor, and these huge booths, and there's a booth babe. I saw my first booth babe. I thought booth babes were extinct, but no. There was a woman in a white jumpsuit, all this big stuff with these huge screens and these big graphics and big monsters and big beastly men, firing big guns and all of that kind of stuff. And that sort of that dominates your field of vision. But then you look around and there's these quiet little guys scattered throughout. And they're the ones who are actually doing something interesting. They're the ones, whose work is actually worth your time and worth exploring. And they've got something to say, and they've got something to share with you that's new, and it's quiet.
So welcome to the experimental gameplay sessions. This year was a drastic discontinuous change from previous years, and we were kind of hit unexpected. Many people have observed that somehow, maybe it's the rise of downloadable games or the easy availability of development tools on the internet, but somehow there's been a little bit of an explosion in creativity the past couple of years. But this is, I think, the most consistent collection of designs that are doing maybe what I would describe as pushing the boundaries in the most consistently thoughtful ways. We're going to start out with Flower by Genova Chen and Nick Clark and the rest of that game company, and they're going to present, not only what they came up with as their final game, but several prototypes that they iterated through on the way there, which is going to be very interesting because of the unconventional nature of their design intention.
Well, before I start working in the game industry, I always assume that games are about these very, very fun activities, some kind of low-class ways for entertainment. But then my assumption has changed once I start to study interactive media. And as I went to the Game Developer Conference and seeing, 20,000 developers from worldwide come to share the experience, to share the technology and the lessons they learned from developing the game, I start to feel, maybe game making is something actually legit. That's something that I can feel proud of if I'm part of this industry, because I can feel the energy this developer has, kind of radiated around them. There's a lot of love in this medium. And that energy makes me feel this is something more important than what I used to think video games are.
So last night, I had the very fortunate opportunity to go out on a night on the town with Chris Crawford, who is this veteran of the game industry. He is one of the very earliest video game designers. I mean, he was making video games back in the day before computers even had screens. I can't believe I'm meeting you.
Jeez.
I'm Jason.
What's the weather like up there?
He was actually the guy who founded the Game Developers Conference, and I guess it must have been nearly 30 years ago now. But this is your baby here.
It's very different. I
mean, what started in your living room?
Yes, this is commercial.
Expo.
Yeah, this is what the industry is now, and this is what the show should be.
His ideas were actually very similar to mine. except he was doing it about 30 years ago, and it didn't catch on. And he himself left the industry with a flourish, basically saying that video games were too much focused on graphics and high polish and so on. This was back in 1992, and if you saw the games that he was talking about, it'd be like a laugh.
I am very dismissive of the pure techie approach to game design. I've said a lot of ferocious things about people who go in, all they want to do is just fuck around with a computer and make it do cute, clever things. And that is not game design. They come up with some clever graphics trick and then say, how can we turn this into a game?
Right.
Game developers are very defensive about the sordid reputation that they have.
Why do you think they have that reputation?
One reason is that games should form character and build your body and so forth. Or at least they should be mentally, you know, like chess. That's a respectable game. And video games don't have any of those traits. So they're just fun and nothing else. And there is a puritanical streak in American culture that feels that fun without any redeeming value is sordid. Oh.
The greatest game of all time, in his opinion, is this game called Mule, that's often cited as one of the first art games. It was released in the early to mid-'80s. I mean, the golden era was in the early '80s when all of this was happening. And I was like, you know, Chris, you were so lucky. It was like a Wild West period, essentially, but a Wild West of enormous creativity and enormous experimentation and energy. I was like, wow, I wonder what it would have been like to live in that era. It sounds like I would have fit in better in that era. Then I reflected for a minute and I said, you know what, though? I'm incredibly lucky to be making games when I'm making them with the group of people that I'm making them with. It's like a renaissance. We sort of got a new Wild West of our own, although it's kind of packed into the nooks and crannies of the crowd. So we're almost like a scattered network of anarchist squatters or something, as opposed to being like roaming through the open countryside.
You know, you're trying to express peace, you know, it's like a flower or cloud. I mean, you're trying to put someone in this mood of tranquility and imagination and, you know, happiness. It's not like you're trying to, you know, exercise any demons.
My life is pretty tough already. I don't want to think about bad things anymore.
I think a lot about the industry, and I'm not like Chris Crawford where I've sort of left it for dead entirely. I mean, I know that there's always going to be these things that disappoint me that are the dominant blockbusters, driven sometimes by the taste of the market or people with a lot of money and so on. And that's the case with any mass-produced creative outlet. That's what's going on in the movies and television. I mean, to the point where television isn't even worth watching at all. But at the same time, a lot of these other mediums have little sub-things that are viable and are somewhat accessible to people who look for them. And we still don't have that in our industry. The industry hasn't really figured out a way to sort of take these ideas that are percolating up from the bottom, they're very interesting, and build on them and filter them back in. And the real problem that I have, and maybe even the reason why I'm making games in the first place, is because I don't feel like there's any games coming out that are really worth my time. I try to play some of the mainstream games that are being talked about and everyone's excited about, and I'm almost always disappointed by them. But I'm still hungry for some video game fodder.
Yeah, it's really exciting time for us because we took a little vacation break over the Christmas holiday and got a chance to spend some time with our friends and loved ones. And then when we came back, we had about a week to put together this build, which is the build that all the reviewers and advanced press will see. So that's a big, accomplishment. It's also a little bit nerve-wracking because we're a little bit shy about showing Journey after all this time. It's been about 3 years now since we started working on it. So it was a big milestone for the team in general, and we just wrapped it late last night.
Journey, the game, happens in a fantasy world that we specifically designed for the player. It's very much about this lone wanderer's journey from the desert to the mountain and everything that happens in between there. It is actually following a hero's journey. It's kind of like a metaphor of our life, it's like we are all on our own journey towards death, but during the journey we will run into other people. Maybe they will be a good company with us for a long time, but then eventually they leave us. And maybe later in our life we rejoin, our paths cross again. So like a journey is more of an experiment, putting the people on the internet onto their own hero's journey and let them crossing their paths into other person's journey. And I'm very interested in seeing what kind of emotional attachment are these people going to build. Video games were usually used to create these very exciting, sports simulations, war simulations, and make people feel very high, or competitive or excited. But like the games we've made at that game company is trying to explore the emotions that was not explored by the past video games, such as Flow, which is based on psychology. It's like how to make people happy. And Flower was more about making people think about their relationship in the city towards nature, and how they are going to deal with this conflict in the future. And this current new game, Journey, it is very much about the kind of the spiritual journey of a person's life and what happens after life and what are you living this life for. This project is more fun than the previous project. The previous project is more about the pressure. It's like, this is my first commercial video game. I cannot screw it up, right? I have to put 200% of my effort in it. And while this one is more like, you are good. Can you be better? So that's a very different mental state.
PAX 10 was actually my first PAX. It's kind of embarrassing to admit that, but I'd never been able to break away from work long enough to attend a pure fan event. And I was invited to speak on a panel about Indie Credible. All of the indie games that we've been making in our community, share that with the PAX audience. And in my mind, I guess, I'd always assumed that PAX was a really hardcore event and that it wasn't the kind of place where a game like Journey could be talked about. And it turned out that that was a total misunderstanding on my part. There were tons of people at the session. And that was really encouraging. So hugely positive vibes at PAX. It was about people who love to play video games, taking it away from the business of games and turning it into something that celebrates the people themselves, the people that play. And I thought that was really fantastic.
Oh my God, that is so awesome.
Wow, that was epic. Thank you. That's great. You want a sticker or something? Sure, yeah.
There's been a rise of independent game festivals, which I think is really great. There's been some sort of jockeying for or positioning in the community in different festivals, but I think it's super great because we are going to have all these sort of sub-communities within this large community of independent game developers. I'm part of an organization called Indiecade that has an annual festival in Los Angeles each year featuring independent games and game developers with a focus on the potential for artistic expression through games that you have, especially when you're doing it as an individual or as a small group of people. One of the games that was showcased and was an award winner at the Indiecade Awards was a game called Antichamber by Alexander Bruce. What Antichamber does is it really takes the fact that it is a game, that it's a totally made-up space, and leverages that in really interesting ways. So you can walk into a wall and then turn around, and what was behind you before is now something that's completely different, right? Which is an experience that can only happen in games.
I've been playing games all my life. I'm not sure what made me jump into them. I guess a bit of escapism, you know, being a bit of an introvert when I was growing up, being very much caught up within all of my own thoughts. I would play games and they would give me problems that required a little bit more creative thinking. And as time went on and I had to try to work out what I would do for a living, making games just seemed like a very natural thing to be doing. I wanted to make games that other people weren't going to make because I wanted to see how they would look.
I was thinking underwater would be interesting here and kind of how we do that. To have bubbles and underwater sound under this area.
Is this going to be an issue if they like elevate over? Because I mean, like they have to climb over this.
Right, and that's one of the reasons I decided to not do underwater here. I've got some really heavy rain here.
Early on in the development of this game, when I was still just a student at university, I would look at people like Ian Dallas, who created a game called The Unfinished Swan, and I saw him presenting his game at this thing called Sense of Wonder Night in Japan. And that was the first competition that I ever entered. And I entered it because my thinking was, I want to know what makes Ian Dallas any different to me. And when I presented at Japan and I met a bunch of other independent developers, the more I realized that there was nothing really that different about, you know, Jonathan Blow with Braid or Jason Rora, but I could see that these were just people who were incredibly passionate about what they were doing. So I was just absolutely driven to learn everything that I needed to know and make this happen. When I was at E3, and people were playtesting the game, I was seeing people do things that I hadn't seen at all before. I'm seeing all of these different kinds of play styles come into the game, and I felt like it would be a real waste to not shape the game around those kinds of interactions, because that way it would allow a whole lot more freedom to different kinds of players. They get to the point where they feel like they've sort of accomplished enough for now and they'll put the game down. But when walking away and as it starts sort of flashing back to them, they're like, oh, that's how I could have solved that puzzle, and now I understand why this game was made, which I think is something very special, and it makes thinking about the work as much of a game as playing it itself.
Yeah, I like it.
I'm a big fan of games that can teach their audience something and that really value their time. When I play a game like Braid or Portal, I walk away with, I guess, more of an appreciation for thinking obscurely about space in something like Portal or about the quantum mechanics in Braid. I feel like I've learned something. It's just about pushing yourself out there into a more creative zone with how you think about the world.
I want to have some sort of sound that ties this space to the other bridge space. So I took the coqui, which is a kind of frog that you get in Puerto Rico. They're the coqui that you hear throughout. I took them and I processed them a whole lot. These kind of playing semi-musically, like on a metronome.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, it's like other areas. I don't particularly care too much about specifically what the sound is.
Sure.
I only really comment if it's like, what the hell is this? What the hell is this owl that you've put here?
Yeah, you didn't like the owl.
No, that was horrible.
Part of the reality of working on, such a long-form project by yourself, you're going to be spending a lot of time doing things that, aren't extremely, fun, but are extremely important for the end user. And I care the most about how the players feel and how they experience the game.
I think something happens when you discover programming for the first time. At the beginning, none of the end goal matters. All you're thinking about is sort of just the joy of programming itself. Just the idea that you can have an idea and out of nothing, essentially, make it happen on the computer screen. And that's this kind of amazing realization when you start programming, and that can kind of carry you for years, where that is the only thing that you need to just keep going and to want to keep improving your skills. And I know I felt that probably for 10 years, just programming. And it was only after 10 years when that started to begin to fade and you needed to start asking why. It's no longer just self-satisfaction, no longer just feeling like you're in control of a world you're creating. You need something more than that.
Can you go to level 9 right now? I want to see if I submitted this. I was doing cloth tests. I don't know, there's
this is pretty good.
Yeah, there's so many different things you can do, and you can feel like you're really moving around, and there's these landmarks, and
hey, I like that.
You can sort of just skid across the entire bridge by holding forward on here.
That's pretty cool.
This is pretty inspiring, Brian.
There's potential for exploration here.
I think it's really easy for an engineer to focus on the engineering because it's so complex and there's so much room for elegance just in the engineering by itself that it can become the focus. It's this big draw of attention. At this company, there's this huge push to resist that. I think it's the focus on the player above everything else that sets this company apart from a lot of other places.
I was thinking just every time you touch the lantern, it very quickly turns on and looks beautiful, and then you quickly just move on to the next one, then next one.
When we started working on Journey, we were not sure what it was really going to be. We knew the feeling that we wanted to have, which was the sense of awe and wonder at the unknown, the sense that you're part of something bigger, but we didn't really understand what that meant in terms of actual gameplay. So at the beginning of the project, you're just doing a lot of prototypes, and you talk a lot about the feeling that you want to create and the environments and the sort of overarching story, and it's a really open and exciting time for the team.
That is interesting. So we could have these jellyfish being random, but as soon as you light it up, they are just stand still, forming a bridge.
The games that I want to make is usually kind of driven by these, inner desire and these very strong desire, these strong feelings. And For a long time, I've always been thinking about the purpose of my life. Why am I here? What am I living for? And right now, my current understanding about happiness is very much about rock solid contribution, about things you make. And even if you die, the things you make will have a permanent impact on many, many people's lives. But it is kind of interesting because it is that game company's game. It is not just my view. So there are things that I want to do, but not everybody will agree to. Then, it's more like what is reflected in the game is the common value of everybody in this company.
The quality that Journey has comes from this very specific applied effort of individuals on the team. I really see it in the architecture and the landscapes, which were designed by Matt Nava, who took a lot of inspiration from Mayan ruins, Greek ruins, and then eventually Islamic ruins, bringing a lot of touchstones of cultural, religious designs from the past into the architecture and into the landscapes, which you can just sense that there's a quality of worship in the buildings themselves, which I think comes directly from Matt's work. With the sand and the cloth in particular, the life that's been breathed back into this landscape, that's all the procedural code, which comes from the effort of John Edwards, the lead engineer, and then has been refined and applied by the designers to create this tactile quality.
We'll write these kind of simulations of nature. And one way to do that would be to focus entirely on the physics of it, just trying to simulate what nature does. And that's the engineering approach. That's the very technical, very elegant, beautiful approach. The other way to look at it is to take kind of an impressionistic approach, to think about what do people remember about a endless field of grass or sand dunes. Sand is extremely sparkly. It's like this sea of diamonds. But on a TV, you can't simulate that perfectly. The pixels are too big. And so in Journey, instead of trying to simulate sand, in a lot of ways we would try to simulate the ocean. And it actually created a better impression of sand than what we could have done if we just tried to follow the physics and simulate sand. There's actually so much baggage in the game industry. There's all this history of making certain kinds of games, and all the tools are built to make those kinds of games. That if you're trying to do something new, you need to make new tools, or else your mind just won't be able to make the leap to the new thing using the old tools. It's not even so much a technical thing as it is a psychological thing, where when you kind of remove the engine, when you build everything specifically for the purpose of serving the player as a human, then those psychological barriers that the engines put up are gone, and your imagination can go where it needs to go. There's definitely a part as a programmer where you'll gladly spend 4 times as much effort writing your own code than you would trying to clean up somebody else's code, which is an inspiration thing. What we are doing is based on inspiration. It requires inspiration to do it right. And so anytime you play something that just kind of makes you go, oh man, no, I don't even want to think about that, then you're dampening that inspiration. You're kind of ruining the spark that makes what we do possible.
Christopher Alexander, who's an architect and wrote a lot about architecture in the 60s and 70s, has a concept called the Quan, the quality without a name, which is life, the life inside of a building or inside of a space that makes you want to go into it. And he talks about how if you see a courtyard that's surrounded on 3 sides by walls with one door leading out onto the street, you hardly ever see anyone in it because it's a dead space. There's no place for the quality to exist. And I feel like a lot of games lack that quan, and Journey has it in a way that that is really special and I think is going to stand out long after the game is finished.
We're working on this game, Mutazione, and which is a kind of action-adventure game set in a strange, tropical, futuristic world. And so Nils is the illustrator and the original, the visionary behind this game. And I'm coming on as a producer and a programmer and a designer.
The whole project started more out as like an illustrative project. I had these pictures in mind of a world I wanted to see come to life. It's this village which is inhabited by mutants.
At least in terms of the style of Mutazione, it's what Nils calls a swamp opera. There are definitely some like Studio Ghibli influences, and I think Miyazaki of Studio Ghibli gets this really right in a lot of his films. It is a mixture of darkness and whimsy. A good reference point for Nils and I, too, would be Boards of Canada. There's a real amount of darkness and brokenness to the whole aesthetic of their music. It's this mixture of romance, of nostalgia, with the darkness of something isn't quite right here. And that sweet-sour mix, I think, is always really, really powerful. Can you show me like this one? Like, so is that dead?
Yeah, you have the different growing states. Here's like the sick state.
Right.
And this is like dead.
Cool.
We're working on this mechanic which is gardening. You know, each plant kind of has their own ambient sounds, and creatures that get attracted by the plants, they have the unique sound. So you kind of create your own ambient soundscapes. There's a lot of like interesting questions sound-wise, like what happens with the harmonics once there's some plants that are dying, for example.
Part of the question was, could we let the player do something more expressive where they got to create something? So the hope is that as you grow this garden and you produce these soundscapes, you'll be able to save them out, to YouTube or to MP3s or something that you can now kind of live with. Yeah, it'd be great to do a launch party for this in a garden somewhere.
Yeah, definitely.
Nils is trained not as a game maker, but as an illustrator. He went to the Copenhagen Design School here in the city and kind of got into games backdoor through an adventure game called Roikblende that he did. At least as a designer, when I think about Mutazione, I'm not immediately thinking about it in terms of game mechanics. But the first thing that comes to my mind is that Nils does amazing illustration work. How can I help him bring that to life on the screen and really put that center stage?
I guess for video games, you always have to keep in mind that, it's the whole picture. It's also like what you show, what you choose not to show, and also the silence in between. When you tell a story, leave enough space for the imagination of the player, so the world really opens up for them.
To be honest, I just want to do cool shit with cool people and make an impact and have fun doing so.
Wow! You're going under the rope.
All of my video game design so far were two-dimensional designs. That was an intentional choice of mine because I felt like, for the most part, 3D graphics actually get in the way of the interactive experience. If you want to have a comprehensively interactive experience with a given system, you need to be able to see all of its parts clearly and see how they're interacting with each other. But when you have a 3D game, the interactivity is always fighting with the three-dimensional nature, because things are blocking your view, and you're fighting with the camera trying to get it into a good place so you can see the situation, so you can make an appropriate choice of what action you're going to take. When you go into this two-dimensional design place, not only can you see the complete situation clearly, you also open up the realm of symbolism more. The best example I can think of is the game Pac-Man. We identify with Pac-Man. We feel like we're him. And when we get eaten by a ghost, we say, ah, ghost got me. We don't say, ghost got Pac-Man. So it doesn't interfere with our immersion into the space, yet we still think about the space iconographically and symbolically. Now, if you go on the flip side into a three-dimensional space, that starts to look like a real object to us very quickly, even in a very rudimentary presentation. And so our brains start reasoning about that as a physical, three-dimensional object. And then we start demanding that it behave like a real, physical object. So we've kind of corded ourselves off into this very tiny little corner of the design space, which is physically realizable, real-life games, essentially. And we're just simulating them on computers.
My initial experience of Passage was so powerful.
Right.
Especially because I found it in the wake of my separation and divorce.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I actually didn't realize that it was a 2D game.
Then you could walk down.
Yeah, until
You're one of those.
Until
I'm
You're
one of the
yes.
50%.
Yeah,
Some people never realized it. And they go into forums to this day saying, that wasn't even a game.
Right, right.
What? No!
Have people missed what it's about, if that's their experience of it?
No, not necessarily, because it's sort of like...
Because that's the way some people live their lives.
Right.
They just hold down the right button.
Right.
And they walk towards this goal.
In the forums and the comment rolls, whenever someone says, oh, it was just a movie where you hold down one button, and then someone comes back and says, you can push down too. Like, oh, I played it 3 times and I never noticed that.
Right.
Just like my life. I never walked down.
Yeah. You never even tried this other thing.
Right. So Passage was my attempt to sort of take all my feelings about mortality and death and all the things I've been thinking about and sort of struggling with my whole life.
Yeah.
You know, laying in bed at 5 years old, I remember thinking about my own death and, like, you know, puzzling over it and crying over it and being scared over it or thinking about the death of my parents and so on. So Passage took all those thoughts of me turning 30 and sort of put them into this form that I really felt was appropriate and sort of this little kind of message in the bottle to the rest of humanity of me feeling alone and dealing with mortality.
And where do you stand now as regards this subject?
I just try to forget about it. Try to carry on.
Yeah. Focus on this delicious meal or playing with your
and try not
friends
to,
or kids.
Well, and it just keeps bubbling back up and haunting me. You know?
Yeah.
I've never been able to have an answer for it.
Is it a motivating factor in your work, do you think?
In everything that I do.
Yeah, right. The big thing that I've learned working at Naughty Dog, and a central part of Naughty Dog's process, is that you simply have to keep the pencil moving. So as soon as I carve out the time to start work on a personal project, I've decided that that's what I'm going to do, because I've had writer's block, so say, for all these years. You know, I've started 100 projects and not finished any of them. And, and my friend Tegan said that he was in the same situation, and the only way that sense of scale got made was that his sole design goal for the project was that he had to finish it.
Right.
And so I decided that's excellent. Excellent
I mean, it
advice.
is hard. It is something that you have to learn how to do, to like force yourself to finish something that no one is forcing you to finish.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And I've sort of gotten the hang of that, I guess.
What techniques?
Well, like in the case of Sleep is Death, I actually announced the game's release date before I was done with the game.
Oh, really?
And so it really sort of forced me to get it done in a certain time frame and actually have a crunch, you know, which I probably shouldn't have done because it was very stressful. But this was my, like, you know, was it my 14th game or something? You know, so I'm kind of tired. You know, I've gone through this process so many times, and there's a certain aspect of implementing a game that's tedious and you know, just like drags out. And so setting this artificial deadline for myself, it became real because I announced it to everybody, so everyone was waiting for it. You know?
Right. Yeah. How did you feel about Sleep is Death and the reception that it received?
Yeah, it was great.
I mean, it seems like it.
Yeah, I mean, I got like a 90% editor's choice from PC Gamer UK and stuff, so...
Yeah.
You know, it was the only editor's choice in the issue, you know, I was like, yes, wow, I got like at least a little review somewhere.
I had written this PhD chapter called In Celebration of Low Process Intensity. My claim is that the game design literature and the game studies literature has often privileged this idea of computation as like the defining feature of computer games. However, I don't think that's the only approach to making games. I think sometimes in trying to define what game means, we end up making a really narrow conception of what games are and what they can be. So a great counterexample to this for me is this game Dear Esther.
I've begun my voyage in a paper boat without a bottom.
You know, some people debate whether it's even should be called a game. It's an interactive world, this beautiful audiovisual world where you walk around this island and you hear bits and pieces of story and voiceover. And there's really no mechanics or no goal. It's mostly about experiencing the audiovisual splendor of this island and piecing together these strange memories that you hear this narrator speak.
When this paper aeroplane leaves the cliff edge and carves parallel vapor trails in the dark, we will come together.
Another great example of this is a game called Proteus. Proteus is like an interactive music video where, again, there's no goals, there's no gameplay, so to speak, but it's a tremendously compelling and beautiful experience where you're walking around this lo-fi island listening to this interactive music, and I think it would be a shame to say, oh, those aren't games, those are something else. We don't necessarily need to look to the computer itself to mediate gameplay for us. In fact, it's often really enjoyable for the players to use and reappropriate digital technology to their own ends and to bring something to the table as well themselves. Okay, here's the deal. We're taking 4 games: Johann Sebastian Joust, Hokra, Super Pole Riders, and Bari Ball. We're putting them all together in one package. It's called Sports Friends, and we're doing it for PlayStation 3 and home computers. You can get access to the games before we're even finished, but we need your support to help make it happen. Check it out. Joust isn't just a game. However intentional this was when we were designing it, I do think it's almost as much dance choreography or performance or sport than it is a computer game, so to speak. I think my biggest interest is exploring the boundaries, like the form of games. The famous literary theorist Mikhail Bakhtin talks a lot about the carnival and festivity and these inversions of social norms and games of subversion and physical interaction and so forth. And so I guess I'm inspired by this type of messy, bottom-up experience where anyone feels like they can get involved in the game. That's very much like a pickup game where anyone can go in the circle, and if they can get a controller, they can play as well.
This is also inspired by, say, the New Games movement, which was a hippie movement in the 70s that related to the countercultural and various anti-war movements that used games to bring together diverse communities and empower those people, and the idea was to get everyone playing. What I'm proudest about with a game like Joust, when I show that game, let's say in the streets of Copenhagen, like, you really do get a very broad swath of people, and people who didn't even think that they were interested in computer games, they might say, well, I don't really like computer games, but I really had fun playing this game. I don't think Joust itself is actually that innovative. We've been playing sports and board games and all sorts of non-digital games for centuries. The trick in Joust is injecting that dynamic into a field where that isn't really expected or that isn't the norm. So subverting traditional video game technologies, but towards weird and different ends. I think it's that act of subversion which is kind of fun in and of itself. I think it's good to open up the definition of games to as many of these approaches and forms as possible, not just what's your core mechanic or what is your game system. And I think people are starting to pay attention, and that's cool. That's
going as a student, I was really interested in the culture of the conference itself, and I would photograph a lot of the displays, the lighting, the environments. How did individual games get represented? And over the years, as I've attended more and more as a member of the community development community, and then eventually to show Journey on the floor, my experience of the conference has really changed. I'm less and less interested in the sort of the glitz and the glamour, the representation, and more interested in the real meaning of, like, what are we doing? What is this industry really selling you? Why are we here? And it's hard to see sometimes when you go to booth after booth after booth, and it's the same game with different artwork over and over and over again. It gets to be a bit depressing. It can be really sad. You feel like there's so many things games can express. Why are we still expressing the same 3 sentiments or the same 5 sentiments? You know, whatever that small number is. Even if it were 50, it would still be small compared to all the things games can express. And it's frustrating. It feels a bit empty-headed sometimes. One of the best things about E3 for me is the Indiecade booth, which is a very small, it's a donated booth. They get, you know, basically card tables, a few chairs, a couple PCs, a couple PlayStations, and then there's just, you know, small indie teams showing off their, you know, scrappy little, you know, elbow grease products, trying to get people interested. And, you know, you'll see Skulls of the Shogun, and you'll see something like Braid there, and you'll go, wow, this is something new and interesting. And I always find myself wondering if I could handle it. If next year when I go to E3, Indiecade has a huge booth with, like, you know, guys dressed up in costumes and girls all scantily clad, like, selling you indie games, could I get that? And could I live with that? And I think the answer is probably no.
Good to see you.
How you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Your mailbox is unattended too. It's quite full.
Is it really? Did you check it as you came in?
I could see it from a mile away.
Is it bulging?
It's bulging.
Oh, good heavens. Well, it's good to see you, Austin. How are you running on 3 hours of sleep, you said?
Yeah, well, and actually, ironically, believe it or not, I was working on Journey until 3 this morning.
Were you really?
Yeah,
Why are you crunching?
Well, they have an October 1st milestone. It was also one of those just great nights, the kind of the joy of creation.
I'm in such a frenzy of anticipation. I played the Flash prototype, and
completely.
Yeah, I can't wait to play it again. I'm so excited to play
it's
it.
Really good.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, the innovation there is, a massively two-player game.
Yes.
Which is a brand new kind of thing.
Yes.
This is actually sort of an interface for human-to-human interaction that has never existed before. It's like the telephone or the letter or the printing press or whatever. But, even stripping people away even more than like an internet chat room does of all the sort of trappings of social.
It's like trying to create a sort of soul avatar, like raw emotion and raw kind of instinct. It's like id to id. It's trying to say how can we communicate on a much more visceral, just simple, primal even sort of a way through its own and in a way that's hopefully fun. Okay, Madam Guo.
That's right, Adam.
Feel free to be loose with this. These timings.
Okay, I won't play anything that you wrote.
Good.
Good.
Yeah, just play something from your new album.
Okay.
So here's four free-ish.
4.5 free.
4.5 free. Yeah, like always, it should be.
Okay.
Here we go. The moment this game came into my life, I knew the cello was going to be the soul of the game. Other instruments come and go almost like travel companions. There's a full orchestra that plays its part, but nothing is so singularly in the core of the whole experience than the cello.
It actually works.
It was amazing. It wasn't even written to be like that, actually.
And I couldn't even hear myself. Is the mic on? Oh, it's on. Can we turn it a little bit?
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
That's okay.
That's hilarious. Well, yeah, that was amazing. Music is one of the few art forms that exists in time. So when you venture into games, music itself is in a way thrown out the window because you've kind of eliminated the linear quality of it to some degree. I had never really explored that before, and that game company is remarkable in the way that they create this kind of safe laboratory in which you can experiment and try things. And so to me, that was the appeal is, wow, I can make music that is interactive. I want to make it as interactive as I can possibly muster. And so what we're doing on Journey is to try to take that and push that to the next level and make it feel like the music is almost sort of mystically aware of what you're doing. I mean, like, there's a part in Journey that's the big open desert, and I said, I kind of want to write a waltz here, something that's got this sense of playfulness in life, to specifically counteract the big, barren, oppressively kind of desolate quality, and to say maybe there's life hidden away. And then I look at the way they modify the color scheme after I send them the music, and suddenly I feel like I'm looking at this beautiful, rich painting. We're able to really kind of affect each other and get in this process where they do something which gives me inspiration, which inspires them, which gives me inspiration, and that's a process. And especially over this kind of time frame, it's how real art is made.
When you have have something to say, and you're using a medium and you're using a lot of money and people's time, their life, to say something, you want to make sure that what you're saying is somewhat relevant and valuable. I mean, otherwise we don't make money, right? So when I picked the subject, I thought there has to be some amount of truth in such an abstract game that even an average person can get something out of there. I cannot guarantee everybody's going to enjoy the desert scenery. I cannot guarantee that everyone is going to have a connection with a cloaked character. But I hope people can sense this very character's life, from happy, not knowing, to be enduring the suffering, and eventually transcends. And I hope that that's something they can relate to from their own experience.
So basically, I'm not sure what the intro is going to look like. Like if he's going to come overhead or if he's going to be attacking a fish, because I don't have the end of the your part set up here. So
right.
Yeah.
Technically, we are in the production of the game. We're trying to polish the game, make it as consistent as possible. Everything has to have what are two reasons to be there, and then you feel like this piece is one. It's actually a lot better than the early exploration stage where we try this a lot, but then in the end we realize it's not working, right? It's actually more fun, in my opinion, at this time. A turn, maybe.
And then, I think what the Frogger means is there'd be maybe gaps or holes where you see the Guardian kind of crossing in front of you, and then you see the light kind of go across the hallway or across where you're trying to walk, so you want to stop and wait for it to go by and then keep going forward or something like that.
We have this mechanical creature that comes by and really just scares the bejesus out of the player.
I imagine this would be pretty cool.
So they're working on making sure this entity communicates all of those feelings correctly. So the player is trying to get through this section of the world, but this antagonist just keeps stopping him and keeps creating this conflict for him.
I think if we establish that he's really evil in the Frogger area and maybe he lashes out extremely violently against the fish or something, then here when he's kind of slowly looking for you, it could be a lot more intense.
After about a year of brainstorming and building and making a lot of rapid progress, we hit a little bit of a wall where there was a lull in the emotional tone of the team. As a result, we had some scary times, but we got through them, and most often by sitting as a group and playing the game and then talking about how it was making us feel individually and then what a player would feel. So we definitely had anxiety about hitting our goal. But one of the things that is really important for an artistic game like Journey is how do you get that freedom to experience the anxiety and then process it and use it as a positive creative force to make your art better, versus just, having this pressure and not being able to perform. And I think at the times when we were the most stressed out was when we felt like we might not have enough time to really get it right.
So right now we're working on 2 of the early levels of the project, and the quality bar of these levels currently is all over the place because part of it we've been showing publicly and part of it has stayed internal. One of the things that I've been working on is these little fishes, bringing them more life. I guess the creatures are always going to have an artificial intelligence. They're never going to be real, but before they were very apparently artificial. They were very static and very linear. And now they have more of an illusion of intelligence. We spent a year working on these guys and we realized that it was insufficient, so I had to do it over. What we did in basically a year, I redid in the last month or so. It's sort of an interesting cycle. If we had infinite time, I don't think the game would ever get done because there's always a better approach you can take. As a creator, you're always thinking the things that you create aren't the best representation of you because you always want to do better. And it's difficult to accept the fact that you actually aren't better than what you just created, because if you were better, then you would have created something that was better. And you didn't, so the fact is, this is how good you are right now. But you're constantly learning, and you're constantly wanting more from yourself. And at some point, you just have to call it and say, okay, this is the best I can do right now, and this is what we're going to deliver.
So you were on like 2 tours since I last saw you.
We did a Sweet Tooth tour. We played this one place in Charlotte, North Carolina called Suicide Mansion, where it was basically like a bunch of meth heads who were just like running around and fighting each other and stuff. And then like Rocky, who was the singer in Sweet Tooth, was like lighting firecrackers inside the house and like.
That's fucking awesome. Wow.
So that was, and then we went to New Orleans and we were like shooting guns in the backyard.
What? I want to go on tour with you.
This mansion.
Fuck video games. A lot of games that come out, especially a lot of games that are coming out now in the casual space, they have a lot of structure that's based around power-ups or grinding power-ups, so you'll play the game for a very long time, and then that will allow you to get a certain amount of coins with which you can purchase a power-up that you use at a certain moment. And the problem that I have with all of those strategies is they're really encouraging you to engage with the game as little as possible, mentally, for as long as possible, time-wise. But the real thing that sort of bothers me about that is, in a lot of ways, you're never getting as good at the game as you would get if you were actually engaging with the game. One of my real mantras in exploring digital stuff was trying to get people to not just enjoy what they were doing, but to really think about it and learn a lot, and to provide people with systems that they could really explore incredibly deeply. How do you take a really complex system and make the entrance look inviting and make people comfortable getting into it? And that was one of the things that I learned with Spell Tower, that it was really possible to do that. It's not an action game, it's a game where you can really pause and think about the board and the tiles and what's going on. And I think that's one of the things that's really beautiful about a lot of classic games, about like chess or solitaire or Go or any board game. Very few of them, until you get into modern times, have timers. For the most part, the real classic games that we look at are just games about making a decision in a space that you can't fully comprehend, but you can start to comprehend. And the real limit becomes how far you want to go into it and think about it before you make your decision. I was really shocked at how validating it is to make money off of something and be able to survive and be like, yeah, I can not work these stupid jobs because I made money off of this thing. Mm-hmm. And like in a space where I am not making these things to make money, and I consistently make choices that will make me less money, it was really weird to then suddenly be like, okay, well actually, like, it's very cool that this money happened, and it represents something that isn't bullshit. It represents like that people who don't really care about me or any of the things that I value, that I can get through to them in some way.
Right, right. And for that, I think you should feel very proud of that. Like, if I were you, I would feel validated for that.
Like, the surface part of Spell Tower is stupid. The good part of Spell Tower is when you get into it and you start seeing the strategy.
Yeah.
But the success of it, and the thing that I'm proud of, is like, you're driven to get to that point. Mm-hmm. Like, and if you see somebody else playing it, it starts to make you want to play it and want to get to the point where it's complex. And if you're playing it, like, the way it's structured drives you to get deep into it, and then you're there. It's like extremely accessible depth.
Yeah, it's like the entry level is simple, yeah.
And because of that, it did explode in a kind of pattern. I didn't make millions of dollars on it, but it did have that like kind of explosive viral pattern that things that are viral, that are popular have. And I think it had a success pattern that is extremely similar to any other success on the App Store, although the scale of it is different.
I mean, it's interesting to think about you as a designer and the aesthetic that you bring to your design. You know, I remember when you were showing me the early prototypes of Spell Tower, you're like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just working on a word game. I got this idea. I want to do something different, right? But then, is Spell Tower fundamentally different than a lot of the other work you've done in the most abstract way? Is it fundamentally different than Halcyon or Scoundrel? You know, like, I mean, like, of course you make the same things over and over again. That's what artists do, is they make the same things over and over again. And when I look at your work, I see a love of emergence, right? And a kind of faith in emergence, like a dedication to emergence, but like in a way that's like more formal than I see in someone like Doug Wilson.
For me, probably the field that games are the closest to is architecture. In terms of, you have so many things that are going into what you're doing. You have engineering, you have visual design, you have usability, you have dealing with how people are actually interacting with the thing that you're creating. So for me, the beauty in games really comes from when you combine all of the aspects and they work together really beautifully to get people deeper into the system. So the games that I try and make, and I think the games that a lot of independent people are making right now, are really about exploring this depth of interaction, exploring a minimal set of rules to get the maximal amount of results, and being really able to take just a little bit of information and turn it into a vast wilderness of space for you to explore.
I'm screwing it up, I'm screwing it up. I'm actually a little rusty right now. What the hell? I'm a little rusty. I haven't told a story to someone in about 3 months. Normally I'm a little sharper than this. I think Sleep is Death is fascinating. I mean, the structure of Sleep is Death is really simple. It's a GM moderated experience using a limited digital palette. So someone draws a bunch of little objects, and then you load them up, and someone makes an action in a space by typing something, and then the GM effectively replenishes the space.
What is in my hand? Is that a gun?
Oh no, did I screw something up? I put in the wrong one. Yes, you're holding a gun all of a sudden. Oh.
One of the complaints that I had heard about Sleep is Death is that it effectively is not a game. It's just like a jamming experience. But the counterpoint that somebody had said is that it kind of is a game because of the really rigid timer. That it like gamifies to some little degree the experience of GMing for the person running it because they have so little time to react. And that like sort of tricks them into being able to do stuff that they wouldn't normally do.
I think it is the time limit that encourages people to create in a way they wouldn't normally create, right? Because I think you agree, if you just told two people to sit down and tell a story, they wouldn't do it. But if you give them dice, or you give them Sleep is Death, or you give them a deck of cards they're going to tell a story out of, then suddenly they're willing to do it in a way they weren't because the system gives them constraints to work under. But yeah, it's not a game. It's not a game at all. But it would be bad as a game, actually. I think if it was more game-like, it would break.
Very interesting. This is a mental state I've never had in a video game. Right. Like the fact I can type anything is kind of making the rule sets too broad.
Right, because it's unconstrained.
Right.
Like your verbs are not constrained by the designer. No, I mean, that's what the whole point of this experiment was, right? All video games have these verbs that are sort of crafted by the designer and sort of this very narrow possibility space. And like, what happens if you just remove those limits completely? Right? What happens if you let the player type the verb, whatever verb they want to type, right? Or point it at something.
I think systems like that have worked, where it's a very limited palette with which to tell a story, and that creates an expression that's really interesting. And I actually think it's most interesting when you don't create a lot of your own art. I think Sleep is Death is most interesting when you try to use the assets that are already there, or a limited palette of assets, and you're just trying to make sense out of something in this very limited way.
Wait, that's it?
Yeah.
Come on.
That's a perfect note on which to end the story, given everything that we've been through.
You have to draw a root card.
So in general, we're getting to the point now where we have just a couple weeks left in the milestone, and I just want to hear from everybody about how we can make sure that we get everything in and make sure that all the seams of all your work are sort of smoothed over.
One of the complaints we've had is the kind of lack of movement in the sand. In the early prototypes, we had crazy waves for the entire terrain, and it looked a lot better. It's when you have crazy waves just in one section that it looks completely wrong.
I would agree with you. We've overcompensated.
Okay,
So then this building,
needs work on it.
There's this stick here. What is this stick?
It's a wall that's been turned down.
Well, I'll fix all this.
Like, why would they build a window with a tilt angle in there?
Because of the stairs.
It's broken. Oh, okay.
It's going at an angle because there's stairs below.
The struggle usually comes from the design. Usually the art and music, these medium that's already established for hundreds of years, they're fairly easy to figure out. It's always the interactive design, because it's a very new field. Nobody really know what's the rule, what's the convention. There's no reference, so we have to try a lot of things, and most of the time they don't work. Interactive design is all about choices. It's about having the illusion that you are in control of the situation, and we give you this illusion by offering you choices, and usually the choices are very limited. You get either go left or go right. But once there's that choices, the players engaged. And so for us, our struggle mainly coming from just make sure the interactive design is actually solid. And then on top of that, the challenge is how is the meaning being backed up by the interactive design. Actually, you know what? Now I see something bothers me.
Oh no!
You see the mountain there?
Mm-hmm.
It looks like some kid just cut out with their scissors.
What hides that is fog.
If we could add a little bit, roundedness,
sort of like the top there,
the top and the pit, that would be totally fine.
Should it have like some, specular glow?
Oh, God.
No.
John, feature creeper professional. Well, I'll just say fix up the edges of the mountain and skybox.
What are you going to do next? You're dodging it. You got to have a thought. You got to think. Oh, I mean, about the next step. You can't have no idea. What's it going to be?
Castle Doctrine is a multiplayer server-based game where the focus is on burglary and home defense. Over the past 2.5 years, my family and I lived in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and it was the roughest place that I had ever personally lived. And so those kinds of experiences that I had there created more of a sense of vulnerability in me and my family than we'd ever experienced before. So that was the sort of core inspiration for the game. I wanted to keep the focus very pure on the core sort of interactions that I wanted people to have, which was building this house for the sole purpose of creating security. You're not going to put walls into your house, just because the walls look cool or to create a cool shape. You're putting walls into your house to create some sort of puzzle or trap that will prevent people from getting through your house to your vault. And so the user content generation, which is a big buzzword in our industry, where you kind of give a player these creative tools and they're unleashed to basically make anything they can imagine, like The Sims or Spore or Minecraft. This game takes user content generation and funnels it into a very utilitarian engineering purpose, where people are creating something, and they're being very creative when they're doing it, but they're creating it for a reason. In terms of the experience, there's no sort of adventure game trappings. People aren't playing this game to walk down a street and pretend to be coming in the front door of a house. They're playing this game to have the core experience of trying to get through somebody else's security. So that's all there is in the game. The entire game industry is gaga over social games right now, and in particular social games that are moving onto mobile platforms. It's where everyone's trying to rush to. People in the independent space have expressed a lot of concern about the ethics of making these things. So if I take a look at Castle Doctrine, and I guess if you step back far enough from it, it would be kind of lumped into something that people might call a social game, because you're playing against other people in the world, and the game constantly runs over time. Although there will not be things that you can purchase in the game. This is a game that you pay up front in order to play and then have access to forever and so on. So it's not based around the same business model as the social games, but it has a lot of the same sort of structure. The last game that I released was Inside of Starfield Sky, which is a game that is effectively infinite. And when I look at some of that data, it kind of makes me cringe a little bit when I see that somebody has obviously spent, dozens and dozens of hours playing my game, and I wonder about what I'm doing to that person, whether I'm enriching or impoverishing their life. On the other hand, if you look at something like chess, would you really look at chess and say, well, chess has ruined these people's lives? Yeah, I guess probably not. So I'm hoping that people will keep playing Castle Doctrine, not just because they're obsessively checking their house and worried about it being robbed, but because the core experience of trying to design even better security for the house after it has been robbed, that rich sort of arms race kind of space between people who are trying to burglarize houses and people who are trying to secure them, will be so intellectually rich that people have just so much to learn there and so many things to think about. And as the community of players evolves over time and changes and people come up with new techniques and so on, that will be compelling, and will be compelling in a very deep way that the game will actually be really deeply interesting.
Hey, Austin.
Hello, welcome.
Nice to
Give me
see
a
you,
hug.
sir.
Shake my
always
hand.
the hugs.
So formal.
A hug and family. So I just wanted to come in and check in with you and run through the final mix.
Austin Wintory, The Journey, Session 1.
We've been doing this for coming up on 3 years, and the leap between Wednesday and today, huge. I mean, every bit as much as when the orchestra was integrated into it and all the cues suddenly took on this new quality.
It does just transform the way the game feels to hear live orchestra strings and all of this beautiful music, in addition to this organic quality that the game has in and of itself. It adds life, it adds an analog quality to the game that I was really missing. It's a huge transformation.
Ideally, in the most extreme scenario, music is at the brink of a complete redefinition of what music is. I think games, there's no precedent in the history of mankind for what you can do in a video game with music. Yes, it's an accompaniment to storytelling to some extent, but the idea of adding in an interactive adaptivity to the music, there's no precedent for that in all of mankind's history. So either music will be generic and slave to this interactivity and will suffer at the hands of it because it represents something so radically new and unprecedented in music's history, or it will breathe new life into music, the likes of which we've never experienced. So while it's overly grandiose to say while working on a video game I am taking part in the rebirth and hopefully breathing new life into music itself, I do feel like some kind of explorer in a new territory at the least.
Basically, I knew the core idea of Journey. I knew both the sort of thematic idea, and I also knew the idea of the technology that was going to underlie it. But of course, in the back of my mind, as a technologist and also as a game designer, it's kind of like, well, yeah, okay, that sounds like a good idea, but that's probably not really going to work, right? You're probably not really going to hook up with this other player and stay with them and have the server actually work to keep them synced to each other, but it did really work, and to sort of an astounding degree. Most people who play the game, including my wife when I sat her down with the game, played for like an hour and never realized that the other character that was walking around the world was another human being. Because it's just so fluid and it's so refined and it just works so well that you don't even notice that it's happening, which is really kind of magical.
With a lot of games, the gameplay is learning about the game itself. It's kind of understanding the system. It's deconstructing the puzzle that is the game. And when I was in school, that was extremely exciting. It was this intellectual world that you were kind of exploring. But now, as I'm getting older, as I'm kind of realizing that, wow, okay, I'm living my life. This is the only life I have to live. I don't necessarily want to live it in some other world. I like this world. And so when I play a game, I want it to reflect this life. I think that's the big difference. What we're trying to do is not create little worlds in and of themselves. We want to create something that when the player plays it, they think about their own life. They think about this world.
Right now, my biggest dream is not say, hey, can we make another game just as great as Journey? Our goal is to change the society's impression of video game. If by making the style of game we are making and we can generate financial profits, then that can influence the business people in the game industry as well, because right now there are a lot of students and indie developers who wants to make a game that pushes the boundary, but there isn't enough money to flow towards that direction. So what I'm most interested in next is to create a big social value and to create a big impact, so it changed the landscape of game industry. Financially, I'm actually quite confident that we will, make a lot of profits, but it's more about how can we do it right so that more people will be aware of, what we're doing. Maybe people will say you're too cocky right now. A lot of people who do these games fails. How could you know you're gonna succeed? I guess, I'm just stubborn. I believe in it. The risk lies in the execution, not in the concept.
It's always the case that the youngest people in your community, your creative community, are the ones that are thinking of the newest and most interesting things. It's always been my experience that youth has this potential for revolution, for change, for pushing beyond the boundaries of what exists, like a fervent energy that it's really important to harness. And right now, it's easier than ever to pick up a game maker tool, to really any digital tool, any digital medium, you can pick it up and create something with it. And then just a little bit more effort and a little bit more hard work, a little bit more coordination, you can create an interactive experience. It doesn't have to be something that's moment to moment, nonstop interactivity. It can be moments of quiet and then moments of interactivity. And I think we're deconstructing the form right now. If you look at what's available on Newgrounds, the kinds of things that are coming out in Flash and Unity right now, you see that young people can work through the experience of falling in love with this medium as they make it. And that's when you get the best work. Games can be made by anyone, for anyone. And if we're doing that, even in a small way, then we're doing something really positive for the future of games. No one's going to ask you in 100 years if you're a game player. In the same way that no one asks you if you're a book reader or a music listener or a food eater. It's not going to be a question. It's more going to be about what's your style, what's your taste, where do you come from, what do you like, And I think that we have an opportunity right now to open the doors to so many different kinds of creators, so many different voices, so many different kinds of experiences, and through them, new audiences, new people.
Yeah.
ridiculously numb. You used to break me, the feelings go but never seem to come. The ice tick in the brain gets up and runs. You used to touch me, ignore the clouds you picture in the sun. Responsibility grows tired when the comfort suffers. We like to feel the hurt, but we can't. Yeah. It takes some sweat to turn away, but then the heart's relieved. Build a world that works the way it's planned. It doesn't